Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. I'm joined by Kadir Üstün from Washington and Deniz Berktay from Kiev. We are going to talk about latest situation in Ukraine, the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, also recent developments regarding regional developments related to this crisis, the grain issue, the food security issue, and many other related questions we will be talking about. Welcome to the show, Kadir and Deniz.
Thank you, Bora.
Kadir, if you allow me, I'd like to start with Deniz because he lives in Kiev for many years and he has been in the city since the beginning of this crisis. Deniz, what can you tell us about the latest situation in the city that you have been living for long and you have witnessed the war from the beginning? We are in the fourth month, actually, of this crisis. What is the mood and what is the situation in Kiev?
Yes. It has been more than 100 days that the war began. The active phase of the war has begun because, as you know, Ukraine says that, and it is true, Russia and Ukraine has been in a state of war actually since 2014. But the most active phase of the war began on 24th of February. More than 100 days have passed. And during the first days or during the first month of the war, the Russian army had attacked Kiev. They had launched attacks simultaneously to many places. At the same time, both to the capital, Kiev, and to the second biggest city, Kharkiv, to Donbas region, etc. And at that time, Kiev had been encircled from three sides, from three directions, from the north, from the west, and from the east. At that time, we were all the time hearing the voices of cannons, weapons all the time. But after the Istanbul summit, which took place on 29th of March, and after the Russians had agreed to retreat back from the outskirts of Kiev, the situation in the capital is quite calm. However, since the Russian army hasn't managed to capture the capital Kiev, they changed their tactics. They moved their army. They concentrated all of their forces, or most of their forces, let's say, in the Donbas region of Ukraine. And Donbas region consists of two provinces, the province of Donetsk and the province of Luhansk. It is the easternmost part of Ukraine, and the main conflicts, the main clashes occur in Donbas region nowadays. At the same time, they are trying to keep control in the southern parts of Ukraine. So the main focus of the war currently is the east and the south of Ukraine, we can say. However, in capital Kiev now, the situation is quite calm.
But probably you feel the consequences of the war going on in other parts of Ukraine. You know, many people left country. The bridges were destroyed. Maybe I don't know what is the situation of the daily life. You know, do you think people have enough food or water or oil for gas for their cars? What kind of situation do you have in the city?
Yes, you're right. And indeed, many families, family relations were disturbed because, for example, it's now forbidden for the male population who are under the age of 60 to leave the country. But many of them sent their wives, their families to abroad. But those men remained in Ukraine. So the war, of course, disturbed such family relations on the one hand. On the other hand, in capital Kiev, although, for example, there's still curfew after 2030 at night, it's from 2030, I mean, from 11 p.m. Until 5 a.m., it's forbidden to leave homes. But we can say that there is still a curfew in Kiev. However, the situation in Kiev is relatively calmer. Even during the most active days of the war, I mean, at the end of February and in March, there was not there wasn't a serious shortage of food. There wasn't a certain serious shortage of food because Kiev had been encircled from 3 sides, but not from the south. If the Russians had managed to encircle Kiev from the south too, then of course there would be a shortage. In this situation, the situation in Kiev is calmer, but you mentioned about the fuel situation. In fuel situation, the situation is quite serious because before the war, Ukraine used to import its oil either from Russia or from Belarus, or it used to have its oil refinery, but its own oil refinery, which was in the city of Kremenchuk, was also hit by Russian missiles. So there is a very serious shortage of oil in Ukraine nowadays.
Yeah, Ukraine and Russia is in state of war, but diplomacy is going on. Kadir, as you know, this week, Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, came to Turkey and he met with Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu. There were many issues on the table. As Deniz mentioned, there was a process going on. Actually, it stalled after the Bucha incident. Russians and Ukrainians were talking about ceasefire in Turkey. In March, they came together. This visit included these ceasefire talks as well, but mainly the focus was actually different. It was more about the grain crisis, Russian control of ports, Ukrainian ports, the food security was on the table, many other issues. What can you tell us about this meeting? What is the importance of Lavrov visit in terms of Ukrainian-Russian crisis, plus Turkey's stand in this crisis as a facilitator?
Thank you, Bora. As you know, Turkey and Russia have a number of issues to discuss that includes Syria and Caucasus, as well as Ukraine. The most, of course, pressing issue is the issue you mentioned, the grain shortage around the world. Both, Ukraine and Russia supply a large amount of wheat and grains to the world, not just to Europe or the region, but Africa, for instance. They rely 40% of their wheat needs are supplied from here, and we've seen some African leaders visit Moscow to resolve this issue. And there have been, the Ukrainians are accusing Russia of essentially plundering Ukrainian grains and selling them at a deep discount. But it's impacting everybody, and there's been some stocking of sunflower oil. There's shortages of grain and oil, various kinds of oil around the world. So it's a little strange thing to talk about these things, of course, in such a time period. But Ukraine is very important for these products, and they seem to be kind of stuck in Odessa area where they need to be shipped out, but there's a Russian blockade, and Ukrainians aren't trusting the Russians. If they, clear the mines in that area, they're fearing that Russia might attack them, use it as an advantage. And then they ask for some guarantees, security guarantees. At the same time, Russians are saying that, it's the Ukrainians who are not clearing the way, etc. So these negotiations, I think, Turkey is trying to facilitate, and that's the most pressing issue at the moment. And this would, if there's a deal, if they can secure, as you know, Turkey tried to create some humanitarian corridors, and they were successful. At least a great to a great extent, they were successful. Many, civilians were able to leave cities under Russian bombardment, and the Turkey is intervening in this part and trying to negotiate with Russia and Ukraine to ship these grains out to at least remedy some of the shortages around the world. But this, brings us back to the debate we have had many times with you, with other guests. Are we going to support Ukraine all the way to the end, whatever that end goal is, and weaken Russia? That's one perspective, one policy. Or are we trying to end the war as quickly as possible so that these grain shortages, inflationary impacts, etc., are eliminated or at least alleviated? So I think these two things are competing, and the grain crisis shows that we need an end to the war as soon as possible. But of course, again, the two sides have to come to the table, and there are many, many hurdles, and Turkey is trying to resolve them. That's what the picture on the Ukrainian side vis-a-vis Lavrovs visit.
Deniz, I have a feeling that the rest of the world is looking at the Ukrainian issue from a very different perspective than Ukrainians themselves. We are talking about food shortage. We are talking about the regional security issues, European energy security, NATO enlargement. Many issues are being discussed in the world related to Ukrainian war. But how much of them are a priority for Ukrainians? What is the main issue for Ukrainians? Do you think these are big problems, the food shortage, grain, wheat, or they have some other priorities?
I can say that the biggest problem is that, as you mentioned, many people have left Ukraine so far. For example, a large part of the population of Kiev, of the capital Kiev, has returned. But however, another large population is still abroad. And since the beginning of the war, millions of Ukrainians have left the country, and millions of people have left their permanent residences. For example, millions of people have left their cities in eastern Ukraine. We should remember that in 2014, when the Donetsk and Lugansk cities in the Donbas region were occupied by pro-Russian separatist groups, from that region, about 1.5 million people had immigrated to the other regions of Ukraine. 1.5 million people only. And even this had caused great social and economic problems in Ukraine. But in this situation now, we talk about 10 million Ukrainians who have immigrated either within the country or to abroad. This is one of the greatest problems. And for those people, of course, the main priority is bringing an end to the war. When it comes to the question of NATO membership, before the war and in previous years, by the way, I have been living in Ukraine for 15 years. I came to Ukraine in 2007, and since that time, a great transformation occurred within the society. Previously, the pro-Western leaders of Ukraine, sometimes pro-Russian leaders were being elected, sometimes pro-Western leaders, and when the pro-Western leaders, politicians were elected as presidents or prime ministers, they were trying to convince the society on the necessity of NATO membership, because at that time only a minority of the Ukrainian population was supporting NATO membership. But now it is being claimed that a larger portion of the population is now supports NATO membership. However, in the current situation, NATO is ready to accept Ukraine. It is just another question. Of course, now NATO is not ready to accept Ukraine under such conditions. And we can, I also, if you allow, I would like to say that Turkey has managed to pursue a very successful policy since the last 30 years, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, because in the Black Sea region, Turkey has managed to managed to establish good relations both with Russia and with Ukraine. And its relations with Ukraine also differs from the relations of the Western countries with Ukraine. For example, Western countries, they make intervention to the internal affairs of Ukraine, while Turkey never makes any kind of intervention to the internal affairs of Ukraine. And as a result, whoever is elected as president of Ukraine, he tries to establish good relations with Turkey. And now, if today Turkey has a significance in the region, if Turkey managed to act as if Turkey managed to pursue a mediation role between Russia and Ukraine, it is thanks to this policy of Turkey, I think.
Do you think the visit of Lavrov in this time, I mean, in this phase of the crisis, will have an impact on Turkish-Ukrainian relations? I mean, do you think the door is still open for Turkey to facilitate negotiations or a ceasefire, or I don't want to use peace because I believe it's too far for us right now, but at least a mechanism which will de-escalate this situation? Do you think Turkey still has that chance? And how the Ukrainians evaluate the visit of Lavrov in this phase of the crisis?
I believe that there is still a chance for an armistice, for a ceasefire, if not for a peace, because there are lots of reasons why a durable peace cannot be assured under such circumstances. But yes, I think there is a chance because now the both sides have got tired, and the war has turned into a dead end. And neither the Russian side nor the Ukrainian side can achieve a considerable result because the Russian army has realized that it cannot capture Kiev. It cannot capture the capital Kiev so easily, or the second biggest city Kharkiv so easily. Their army has struck in the Donbas region mainly. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army has tried to launch a counterattack next week towards the occupied city of Kherson. However, this counteroffensive of the Ukrainian army has been stopped due to arms shortages. Due to such reasons, this counterattack has also been stopped. And for example, about 2 weeks ago, the Ukrainian authorities were too much self-confident, we can say. They were talking about a counter-offensive, as a result of which they believe that they could have been able to liberate all of the occupied territories. But now their rhetoric, their declarations are now more moderate, I believe. I see. And in this situation, an armistice can be secured. What kind of an armistice may be under such conditions? I believe that, for example, Russia at first forced Ukraine to recognize the annexation of Crimea by Russia. For example, Russia may give up such a demand, but the both sides may ignore each other's positions, I believe.
Yeah. What about the perception in the West, Kadir? Americans and Westerners are trying to isolate Russia. They tried to, in a way, contain their contact with other countries. Under these circumstances, Turkey is still in touch with Russians and hosts a Russian foreign minister. How do you think this is being pursued by the West. What kind of impact do you think it will have, the visit of Lavrov? Also, we should remind our viewers that Turkey has blocking NATO enlargement due to Swedish and Finnish positions about Turkish security concerns with regards to terrorist PKK organization.
Bora, let me start with what you said last. As you know, the West has been pressuring Russia through sanctions. They have just announced that they're going to end oil purchases. But when it comes to hard-hitting sanctions, they've been somewhat slow in terms of purchasing oil and cutting the gas from Russia. Those are big items, and they continue to provide funds to Russia. And Russia already had several $100 billion in its coffers to finance this war. So I'm not so sure if Western pressure has been very effective so far in deterring Putin. It has obviously created a lot of costs for Putin, but it hasn't been able to stop him from trying to acquire a good portion of Ukraine, territorially take it over. And he probably calculates that he's already, suffered the costs, so he may as well continue on this road. But the Western perception on Turkey has been somewhat careful. I think there's a recognition that they understand Turkey cannot impose sanctions against Russia. Turkey has been focused on trying to, achieve some sort of ceasefire as soon as possible, and then bring the sides to talk about a negotiated solution. And that effort was actually producing some results earlier on. But as you said, some massacres that happened in Ukraine, on top of it, neither side felt that they were going to lose more than they were going to win. So their incentives to make a deal have weakened over the past couple, maybe about last 2 months. But as I mentioned earlier, the grain shortages are impacting everybody, and this situation, the longer it goes, the worse for the world as a whole. Everybody's complaining about the inflation. Everybody's, unsure about the future. The World Bank just announced that the world GDP was, the economic growth was going to go down this year. Then it was 4.1%, I think, last year, or 4.4. This year, they're saying it's going to be 2.1, and it might go down even further next year. So it's impacting the entire world, and there needs to be a solution. I think that's where Turkey is focused. So the West, when they look at Turkey's efforts, I can say that they haven't been big supporters of Turkey's efforts, because they're kind of caught between those two policies. As I mentioned earlier, are we going to basically make sure that Putin is defeated at all costs and no matter how long it takes, or are we going to find a solution very soon? And I think that debate is becoming more and more up and sort of pronounced more clearly in Europe as well. We saw Macron's, statements about the need to find a solution as soon as possible. So I think as this situation, the conflict drags on, there will be a need for countries like Turkey to, bring the sides together. We are not there yet. I agree with you on that one, but I think there's that recognition. So we don't see a lot of criticisms from the West for Turkey's actions, not imposing sanctions, bringing, Lavrov to Turkey for discussions. But at the same time, we are not seeing a lot of robust effort to find a solution. The effort has been more on supporting Ukraine through, military aid, humanitarian aid, which is very legitimate and they need to be done. But at the same time, a lot of effort has to be put into, I think, ceasefire and peace efforts as well, because this is not 2-3 months down the road. And I made this too long, I'm sorry, but in November, there will be elections in the US. We are already seeing public is kind of starting to forget about Ukraine. They're discussing other things, and soon they're going to be discussing the elections. And there's a lot of voices in America that says, why should we care about Ukraine at this level? There's still a bipartisan consensus, but the public is slowly moving away from focusing on Ukraine so much. So I don't think the West has the luxury to kind of come after Turkey or criticize Turkey. On the contrary, they should be, I think, making more visits to Ankara and try to sort of revitalize that track that tried to bring both Russian leaders and Ukrainian leaders to the table.
It seems that this war will be a long one. There is tendency that the Westerners want to make Ukraine as a quagmire for Russia. There is an understanding that this will be a war of attrition. So how do you see this, Deniz, from Ukrainian point of view? Do you agree with that? Do the Ukrainians wait for a long war? Are they prepared for this? Or do you expect any quick end to this problem? What do you foresee under these circumstances, given the situation of the US, as Kadir mentioned, maybe they are going to lose their interest at some point, but the destruction and the problems will go on in Ukraine?
Well, in general, I can say that, as we talked before in this program, in 29th of March in Istanbul, a consensus was reached between Russia and Ukraine. But after that, first of all, those sites from the city of Bucha was published in media organs in the world, and this situation changed the atmosphere in Ukraine. It was the first important reason why Ukraine changed its attitude after the Istanbul summit of 29th of March. And the second reason was that the Ukrainian administration was also under the influence of the United Kingdom, and some Ukrainian newspapers, Ukrainian media organizations published such articles in which they say that their sources are in the office of the Ukrainian president. They claim that after the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Ukraine on 9th of April, the situation, the attitude in the Ukrainian administration completely changed, because the United Kingdom simply doesn't want a quick end to this war. They just want Russia to lose all its power in Ukraine. So they are for the prolongation of the war. This is also the general opinion in Ukraine. But I think that after some point, the majority of the population will desire to bring an end to the war. I mean, the general population in Ukraine, the majority of the population will desire to bring an end to this war. But they, of course, the Ukrainians will not wish any kind of peace, but they will wish reaching such a peace which will not threaten their sovereignty. So if a compromise solution will be found between Russia and Ukraine, then most of the population in Ukraine will simply greet this.
Kadir, what about the attitude of NATO countries? I think right now the situation is more focused on, I mean, their attention is more on Finland and Sweden, although the war is going on in Ukraine. Do you think there is a mismanagement of the situation? I mean, why don't the leaders of NATO focus on Ukraine and they directed their attention to Sweden and Finland? Do you think this is kind of a problem which will, make the problem worse?
So it's the NATO countries have supported Ukraine. They have also sent reinforcements to NATO countries, including Poland and others, to make sure that those countries were not, they felt the threat, especially in the early days of the invasion around Kiev, when Russians looked like they could be taking over Kiev soon. So many countries felt, many NATO member countries felt threatened. So the alliance sent them reinforcements and to reassure them, right? At the same time, individual NATO countries like United States and UK, they have sent a lot of support to Ukraine. And those initial things raised the questions about, non-NATO countries, especially being at the, potentially targeted by Russia, even soon, either soon or in the future. So Finland and Sweden were among those countries who felt that one day that it could be their turn. And the Baltic security had been discussed for a long time, but these countries, retained a neutral stance for years, and they've enjoyed that status. Nothing happened in the Baltics. So they applied, and now there's a NATO enlargement question, and a lot of NATO members are okay with that in principle. But if we go back to history a little bit, and we look at Georgia and Ukraine, Turkey was actually supporting their membership, right? And NATO was slow in considering Ukraine's they never applied fully, but NATO was slow to consider Ukrainian membership, and they didn't give them a clear timeline, which made the issue, like Deniz mentioned earlier, we have a pro-Western government and then pro-Russian government in Ukraine. Ukraine has always oscillated between these two camps, largely because there was no clear sort of goal or timeline that was provided to Ukrainians by NATO countries. So those were mistakes. Today, like you said, the conflict is happening in the east and south. It is impacting Black Sea security. It's impacting grain, exports to the world. And that's where the heart of the crisis is, both regionally and for the world. But Finland and Sweden's application, those countries want to feel safe against Russia. So I don't want to undermine the importance of that, but it is a secondary concern for NATO countries. It should be. It is naturally, they've enjoyed for so long security as a neutral country, saying, okay, we're not going to be involved, etc. But Ukraine actually was more forward. They were more pro-NATO for many years, but they couldn't enter. So it's a bit of a matter of priorities. It's I I think NATO countries do need to really focus on what to do about the conflict and think about NATO security long term as well. They can do that both at the same time. But right now, I think ending the conflict should be #1 priority. NATO enlargement is going to be discussed, and members like Turkey have serious concerns about specifically Finland and Sweden's membership. We should also remind viewers, Turkey can be even considered a pro-NATO enlargement country, actually. It's just that these two countries, their understanding and treatment of terrorism raised some concerns on the Turkish part. And of course, the larger question of US support for PYD, YPG in northern Syria as well. Sorry, I made this too long again, but I think you're right that NATO countries need to be focusing on how to end this conflict. If they're going to go after this somewhat elusive goal of defeating Putin, this will take years, and I don't know if that's going to be good for Ukraine or anybody else.
Yeah, before we close, Deniz, I want to ask you about the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. He was the rising star from the beginning of the war. He spoke to parliaments. He made online statements, statements and meetings with different countries. Do you think he has still controlling the momentum, or what is the situation, both in terms of his international posture, international position, and also within the country? What is the support that he gets from the public under these circumstances?
Well, now it's hard to make such estimations because now there's martial law in Ukraine in force, so we cannot measure the public opinion so easily. But we can make some assumptions. We can. I think that first of all, Zelensky was elected as president 3 years ago. At that time, he was a more moderate person in terms of relations with Russia. He was for a quick peace with Russia at that time. And under those current circumstances, he also pursues a more moderate line in terms of war. The majority of the population also supports this. But now, is he really in control of the situation in the country? Now, it's now hard to guess, because one of the advisors of the president of Ukraine, Alexei Arestovich, yesterday said that now there are some internal splits within the Ukrainian army. A large part of the Ukrainian army, advisor of the president of Ukraine, Alexei Arestovich, yesterday announced that there is a huge split within the Ukrainian army. He claims that a large part of the Ukrainian soldiers advocate a quick peace with Russia, while another part of the Ukrainian army is for fighting till the end. So under such circumstances, it will be hard to guess whether Zelensky is now in the control of the situation or not. So if the war continues, what it will bring to Ukraine, it's now uncertain.
Do we have any idea about where Zelensky stands? Does he want to fight till the end, or he is for a quick end? Do you have any idea about it?
I think he has a more moderate position. I think if the initiative will be with him, if he will have the initiative, he is for a quick end to the war. Because after the war began with Russia, he said that he is ready to negotiate a permanently neutral status of Ukraine with Russia. He declared about this on the second day of the war. So I think he is more inclined to support peace, I suppose.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So maybe we can see a quick end of the war, depending on the situation, which part of the Ukrainian army will win this maybe debate or whatever. But it's interesting to know that there is such a situation within the Ukrainian army. Before we close, Kadir, do you want to comment on that?
Well, it is natural. I think there will be conflict of opinions, differences of opinion about this. But I think here the countries that support Ukraine the most, the UK and the US, have a responsibility, right? They need to set certain goals and timelines that are realistic. And nobody is saying Ukraine should give up their sovereignty or give up territory. But there should be a goal on the part of those who support Ukraine in a serious way. What are the sort of timelines? What do we want to do here? And is this going to be an endless war? I think if they weigh in on that and if they make their positions clear, the debate inside Ukraine will be healthier. And instead of, maybe different factions trying to, influence the leadership in one way or another. I would agree with Deniz that probably Zelensky would be open to some sort of negotiation, but I think, let's say, in early April, he has become a lot less conciliatory in his tone. So we'll see how it happens. But I think it's going to be important how NATO countries position themselves and clarify what they want to see in this conflict.
Okay, that's it from Türkiye Talks today. Thank you, Deniz Berktay from Kiev. Thank you, Kadir Üstün from Washington, and I'm Bora Bayraktar. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Bora.